Morning, Mount Olive Church, Tuesday devotion, and we're talking about Abraham. We're in Genesis chapter 22 today. Pastor done the first one on Monday, and kind of got us set up with a little background of Abraham, and told you who he was, and about leaving his land and leaving his father's house, getting away from his kindred, and and all those things, and done a good job of setting this up. And we're going to get into verses 3, 4, and 5 tonight or today of Hebrews. Golly, I messed up. Of Genesis 22, and then we're also going to go to Hebrews chapter 11 and verses 17 through 19. Great scripture here. I think the pastor mentioned in the first devotion one of the top 10 books or one of the top 10 chapters of the Bible, and this has always been way up there for me. I've always loved to study Abraham, and actually, I guess the first sermon that I ever preached was on Abraham and Lot, and when they were in the wilderness and looking for choosing land and all that. So it's always been a good study for me. The theme that we're sticking with, experiencing God through complete obedience. And, sometimes that's easy to say and harder to do, right? Experiencing God through complete obedience. Because if we really want to examine our lives, we let so many things come in between us and our obedience to God. And that could be from a number of things. I know the pastor mentioned that whether that's hobbies or whatever, that could be so many things, work, whatever it is, that can keep us from having complete obedience to God. So we're going to look at verses 3, 4, and 5, and then we'll go over to Hebrews chapter 11 here in just a minute. But I want to touch here on verse 3. It says, "And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and he saddled his ass, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he clave the wood for the burnt offering. And he rose up, and he went unto the place of which God had told him." So God comes to him in the first two verses that the pastor read. The God comes to him, and he said, "Take now thy only son, Isaac, whom you love, and you're going to take him to Mount Moriah, and you're going to offer him there." I thought the first thing that we looked at in the background of Abraham over in the earlier chapters, you look, and when God comes to him and tells him he's going to give him this land, and he's going to bless all the families because of him, and he makes him those promises. You look and you see, man, Abraham bails out, and I like the point. I like the point that was made that he took Lot with him, and that may have been a mistake because that caused a lot of trouble later on. But that was probably a little bit easier, for sure, to head out. His family was in a lot of idolatry, and God had promised him these things. So Abraham, he leaves, and that, I'm sure it was a tough decision, but it was nowhere close to this decision that he made here. And God come and has told him, "This is your only son, whom you love, and I want you to take him, and I want you to offer him. Take him up into the mountains, place I'm going to show you, to Mount Moriah, and here I want you to offer him up. And I want you to look at complete obedience." Okay, we're going to look at three things here that I've got out of this verse. And one, he rose up early. Complete obedience starts with going when God says go. Man, oh man, ouch and amen for Jody, because complete obedience starts when God says go, and it starts with going when He says go. But how often do we put that off? I need to pray about this. We may be definitely, and I'm not okay. Back up here a second. I know we need to know when God's talking to us and make sure it's not of ourselves. But how many times when we know that God is moving us to do something, to go somewhere, to do something different, to a different calling on our life. Think back to Jonah, and what God had called him to do, and he ran. That's what most of our reactions are to most of the time. And I think back to myself, I couldn't tell you. I'm not talking about days, weeks, or months. I couldn't tell you the years that God spoke to me about calling me to preach. And I fought that off for so long. But complete obedience starts with going when God says go. And he rose up early. There was no hesitation. The second part, he saddled his ass. He got prepared to go. Okay, he done what he needed to leave. He told him he was going to Mount Moriah. Abraham knew which direction this was, and he knew it was going to be a journey, and it was going to be a few days to get there. But he made preparations to go. He just didn't go blindly. He went into it knowing what God had called him to do. And then he clave the wood for the offering. He was showing God his complete obedience. I should have put complete obedience, but he was showing God his complete obedience in taking what he needed. He was taking that offering, that wood for that offering, because he was planning to do exactly what God had told him to do. He wasn't going into it half-heartedly or saying that, I'm just going to start that direction and see what happens. He gathered the wood before he left, and he claved that wood to take with him. Verse 4, it says, then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw the place afar off. So the third day, and we're going to look at that here in just a second, but he lifted up his eyes. I want to talk about that. When God moves us, it's so importantly for us to have our eyes lifted up to him. It's so often that we put our head down, we half-heartedly go into what God has called us to do. And Abraham was looking for this place. Abraham lifted up his eyes. And when he did, God showed him that place. He knew where he was going then. So it's so important for us to be able to do that. So the third day. So what's so important about the third day? Then on the third day, we're going to look at that here in just a second over in Hebrews, but it's so important. Listen, on the third day, it's the same as the pastor talked about. He goes into Mount Moriah, and he talked about how special this place was. Just as Christ was raised up, but on this mountain that he's going to, a place that later Christ would be crucified in the same mountain area range, in this same place. On the third day, that's important because Isaac was going to be raised up. Isaac was going to be raised up. And I believe Abraham knew that with everything in him. He didn't, I think he went and he was going to, you'll see later on that he was going to follow through with exactly what God had told him, but he knew God was going to provide. Look here in verse 5. It says, Abraham said unto his young men, those that had left with him when he went, it says, abide ye here with the ass. I and the lad will go yonder and worship. Man, complete obedience will always bring a heart of worship. Complete obedience will always bring a heart of worship. Sometimes it may not be what we were expecting God to lead us to, but complete obedience, even though it may mean us giving up something, even though it may mean making changes in our lives, it will allow us to completely worship with our heart. We can go in and lift our hands and sing the songs. And, I've heard, people say this before. Mark Hall said this before. Listen, worship is more than words on a screen. And until we are completely obedient to what God has called us to do and completely obedient in our walk with Christ, it's hard to completely worship. Now, we can worship, but you'll notice sometimes if you're not where you're supposed to be, or you're not being obedient to what God has asked you to do and called you to do, sometimes the hand don't go up as far. It's hard to worship. He was going to give up his son, to sacrifice his son, and he still called it worship. We're going to worship. And then look what else he says at the end of verse 5. It says, and come again unto you. I'm going to come back and come again to you. Okay? He knew God was going to provide. He knew that was going to happen. Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, in Hebrews chapter 11, let me back up here just a second. When you go to Hebrews chapter 11, it's the Hall of Faith. Okay, we talk about the Hall of Fame where we put all these great athletes, people that have achieved a lot of things. Hebrews chapter 11 is the Hall of Faith, and it talks about a whole bunch all the way through that. I'm not going to go back into those, but let's go to verse 17 here through 19. It says, by faith, complete obedience has to start with faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, let's stop right here just a second. He was proved, he was tested, and the pastor brought that up in the first one. In case you missed the first devotion and you're picked up today, the very first verse of chapter 22 says, and God did tempt Abraham, and not in a sense that we think, but that in the Hebrew, that means he proved him. He was going to prove Abraham's faith. It says, when he was tried, he offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Earlier on in the chapters before, and God come to him and said, when you leave, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to curse them that curse thee, bless them that bless thee. All families are going to be blessed from you. And even in Genesis chapter 21 and the chapter before that, I had it marked here. I don't know if I can get back to it. I'm not going to be able to find it right now, but he tells him, he says, you're going to be blessed because of Isaac, that in Isaac shall thy seed be blessed. He knew all this was going to go through from Isaac. Now, whether he thought that God was going to provide the lamb, as I'm getting way too far ahead of the chapter, but that was going to be there, or whether, listen, he was all. My commentator makes a good statement here. He was already dead in Abraham's eyes. He was willing to give up his son. He was going that far. And then he says, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence he also received him in a figure. Abraham knew God was going to provide. One way or another, he knew God was going to provide, or he would raise Isaac up, which goes back to even more importantly on the third day. And when he tells them, I'm going to skip back here just a second because I've left something out. But talking about when he says, we will come into you again, me and the lad are going to go yonder and worship, and then we'll come into you again. That was a wholehearted conviction statement from Abraham. I mean, he knew with everything in him, from chapter 20, I've got that verse here now, 21:12. And from 21:12 says, God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad and because of thy bondwoman, and all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. He knew there was a plan. Pastor talked about being able to trust God's plan in complete obedience, no matter what that looks like to us or where that may lead us. He talked about being able to trust that. Abraham trusted God's plan. From the time he rose up early to the decisions he made on what he took and the preparations he made and carrying the wood, he knew God was going to provide. Accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. He was as good as dead in Abraham's eyes. I don't want to get too far into the next few verses here, but you're going to see this week and throughout this study, you're going to see that Abraham is going to follow through. He is going to follow through with exactly what God had asked him to do. There is no better example. There is no better example other than the man himself who bowed down in a garden. There is no better example of complete obedience. No better example. And Abraham expresses that. I hope you guys enjoyed something from this. I hope you got something from it. And hope everybody's having a great week. Keep your head up. Keep crying out in prayer to God to heal this community, to heal this land. You know, just looking today at already at the prayers that God has answered. So many have been sick. seen Kim Lawson had posted requests for prayer for someone that she knew. Their child had been thought was paralyzed, and man, God moved in that. God's moving in so many. Chaz has told me stories about those at the hospital, and God has moved in their lives. A lot of people sick and going through hard times right now. Remember them. Remember James Yates, Lisa's husband. He's in the hospital and having a very hard time. So lift him up to the Lord with everything that you have. I love you, Mount Olive. Hope you have a great day.